The Pullman Strike by Alexcis, Hickman, and Camryn Wade. The Pullman Company, owned by George Pullman, manufactured railroad cars, and by 1894 it operated first-class sleeping cars on almost every one of the nation's major railroads. The name Pullman was a household word. The company's manufacturing plants were in a company-owned town on the outskirts of Chicago. This community was filled with well-paid workers, and he also publicized this town. On a 3,000-acre tract located in the area of 114th Street and Cottage Grove, his workers were required to live in this town. His workers also had to use the library, clergy had to pay for using the church, and they were expected to accept cuts in wages and to not criticize workloads.
So what did he do with those millions of dollars? He does what every millionaire does. He made a town named after himself. And that would be Pullman, Illinois, where his factory was. Pullman had figured out that if he built a town for his workers, he could control costs and he could kind of pump the money he was paying to his workers back into his own pockets. So workers wouldn't really receive their full payment. They would take out their rent and money for their foods and give them coupons, and he really controlled the town.
On May 11, 1894, the Pullman strike began with a walkout by Pullman Palace Car Company factory workers after negotiations over declining wages and poor working conditions failed. These workers appealed for support to the American Railway Union, the ARU, which argued unsuccessfully for arbitration. On June 20th, the ARU gave notice that beginning June 26th, its membership would no longer work trains that included Pullman cars. The boycott, although centered in Chicago, crippled railroad traffic nationwide until the federal government intervened in early July, first with a comprehensive injunction essentially forbidding all boycott activity and then by dispatching regular soldiers to Chicago and elsewhere. The soldiers joined with local authorities in getting the trains running again, though not without considerable vandalism and violence from factory workers that were still angry. ARU President Eugene Victor Debs was arrested and subsequently imprisoned for disregarding the injunction. The boycott and the union were broken by mid-July, partly because of the ARU's inability to secure broader support from the labor leaders.
This became a big deal because the mail was on those trains. That brought the United States government into the strike. And the United States government called up the National Guard. And the National Guard went in, and it was an unsuccessful attempt to put the strike down. That caused frustration. That brought in the regular federal troops. They sent up federal troops from the Bay Area, Marines and Army.
While the use of injunction for such purposes upheld by the Supreme Court in 1895 was a setback for unionism, and while most public sentiment was against the boycott, George Pullman attracted broad criticism and his workers wide sympathy. A federal panel appointed to investigate the strike sharply criticized the company's policies and refusal to arbitrate, advancing the idea of the need for unions and for increased government regulation in an age of large-scale industrialism.
To the strike, workers gained more respect from their bosses, as they were provided with suitable rewards and more comfortable living and working conditions. The division between the two classes, which before the strike was incredibly distinct, grew slightly closer in terms of social power, and this in part led to less violence between the two groups afterwards. It is also interesting to note that Labor Day was first designated as a federal holiday in 1894 after the strike, at the behest of Grover Cleveland in order to recognize and celebrate organized labor.